Unit 5, The Conquest of Joshua. A new generation inherits the land. Okay, so now the unfaithful generation that came out of Egypt will wander in the wilderness for 40 years as a result of their unfaithfulness and their complaining and their rebellion against God. And so what happens from there? So we go from wandering to conquest, and now a new generation is going to prepare to take the land. So some of the key things that happen is, for one, in Numbers 20, Moses, who is fed up with these people and their complaining, actually disqualifies himself to go into the land. And we see that in Numbers 20 when he strikes the rock twice, and God disqualifies him for that. But then we see that the people now finally, they travel from Kadesh and they go over to the land of Moab. And this is Numbers 20 through 25, and all kinds of stuff happens in these chapters, right? This is where we see the bronze serpent incident. We see the Balaam incident. We see the battles with Og and Sihon. Aaron even dies during this time. And so a number of really important things happen during this time, but they finally arrive to Moab, and now they're beginning to make the final preparations to take the promised land that God has promised to the people back in the time of Abraham. So we're over here in Kadesh Barnea, and so the land of Moab is actually right about there. So that's where they head to. And so now, after 40 years, the time of wandering is over, and a new generation prepares to enter the land. And as that happens, something very important happens before they go into the land, and that is that Moses gives the law a second time. And that is, of course, the entire book of Deuteronomy. So the book of Deuteronomy is Moses giving the law again to this new generation. The old generation has died off, and this new generation is now going to inherit the promise that God made to Abraham. But before they do, he gives basically the entire law that we see in the book of Deuteronomy. And so there's a lot of amazing stuff in this book. It's quoted so often in the New Testament. But I just want to look at one particular passage that we had actually looked at previously in one of our previous modules, and that was this. In Deuteronomy 9, verse 5, it says, "It is not because of your righteousness," another one of our key words, "it's not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land," their being the previous generation, their parents' land. "But because," and he gives two reasons here, "because of the wickedness of these nations, that the Lord your God drives them out before you." So that's one reason. And then he says, "and that he may fulfill the word which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So in this verse, we say that they're going to inherit the land, but it's not because of their goodness. It's because of the amazing wickedness of the people in the land, and to the faithfulness of God to the Abrahamic covenant. That's why they're going to get this. And so Moses reaffirms this to them. And so at the end of Deuteronomy, he renews the Abrahamic covenant to them. And then we see a transition of leadership, because Joshua now succeeds Moses as the leader of the people. Moses does not get to go into the land. He dies on Mount Nebo. And then we see God now speaks to Joshua and promises him the land. And he tells him to be strong and very courageous, because what he's about to do is unbelievably difficult. But he says this, "Be strong and of good courage, and to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you." So here we see both covenants at play. We see the faithfulness of God to the Abrahamic covenant, and now we see God speaking to Joshua regarding the Mosaic covenant. And he says this, reading again, it says, "According to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you, do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go." So here God is now speaking again to a key figure at a very important time to let him know of his faithfulness and to remind him of the covenants. And so now we go into the conquest of Joshua, and the people actually now get to possess the land. So what happens? Well, the first thing is that in Joshua chapter 2, Joshua sends spies out into the land, and there's this character named Rahab, who is a Gentile, and she is a woman. In fact, many think that she is a prostitute, but she takes in these spies and protects them. And in doing so, they tell her that they're going to destroy the land, and she says, "Well, take me with you." And so out of her faith, though she's not part of the lineage, she shows the faith of Abraham, like we talked about earlier. She actually ends up not only going with the people and living, but she actually ends up in the genealogy of Jesus Christ that we see in the New Testament, which is awesome. So after that, the people now begin to enter the land, and they cross the Jordan River miraculously. And this often gets overlooked because we know about the Red Sea, but God also parts the Jordan River so that the people can go into the land of Canaan. And then from Joshua 5 through Joshua 12, we read about how Joshua, with the help of God, conquers the land that God has given to him. And God is directly involved all over the place. As we know of many of the battles, God supernaturally helps the children of Israel, led by Joshua, to victory. And so if we go back to our map here, remember that they were in Moab. This is Mount Nebo. That's where Moses has died and buried. And so up here, that is the area where Joshua is going to lead the people into Canaan. And so there's two really important cities in this area that are significant to the conquest of Joshua. And they are, of course, Jericho. That's the one where they march around the city, and then the walls fall down, and they take it, being faithful to what God asked them to do. And then there's also the town of Ai. And so as we zoom in on these, this is where these particular towns are, and we can actually chart with a pretty good estimation where it was that they crossed the Jordan River, where God helped them into the land of Canaan, where they take the city of Jericho, of course, by marching around it 7 times, and God, of course, giving them victory there, as well as over in the city of Ai. And so then, now that those two are taken, we now see the continuation of Joshua conquering the land and defeating the Canaanites. So in chapter 6 and 7, he attacks these military outposts, Jericho and Ai, with God's supernatural help, and then he launches 2 campaigns. He launches a southern campaign of Canaanite cities in Joshua 10, and then in Joshua 11, we see him initiate a northern campaign. And basically, in total, these 2 campaigns, Joshua, with the help of God, defeats 6 different Canaanite areas, 31 kings, in about a time of 6 years. And so there's no way that would have ever happened without God, but God is being faithful to his promise, to the Abrahamic covenant, and to this particular people group. So it's cool to see how these things are now starting to come to fruition. Well, what happens after that? So after the land is taken, Joshua divides the land between the 12 tribes of Israel. And so 2.5 tribes, they settle to east of the Jordan River. That's Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. And then we have 9.5 tribes that settle to the west of the Jordan, and all the rest of them go there, including the other half of Manasseh. So we have each of the sons of Jacob, and Ephraim and Manasseh, of course, being the sons of Joseph, are there to represent Joseph's portion. So if we look at the map, we remember that the Egyptian Empire actually covered the land like this back in the time of Egypt. And so now that the land has been taken, God has delivered it according to his promise to Abraham, to Joshua, and now he's divided it amongst the tribes of Israel. What does it look like now? Well, it actually looks something close to this. And so this is how we can imagine the tribes being dispersed. In fact, so if we zoom in a little bit, you can see that they're actually split right down the middle, and that is, of course, the Jordan River right there. And so you'll see that the 2.5 tribes are to the west of the Jordan River, and then everything else is to the east, and then the other 9.5 tribes are to the west. And so that is what happened. So now that the land has been conquered, it has also been divided amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. We can kind of just look down. This is, of course, just an artist rendition, but it gives us a sense of where each tribe's land actually was allocated to. So that's what the land looked like then. If you're curious, this is actually what it looks like today. So we have all of the modern nations there. You can contrast them and what they look like then, of course, including the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So from there, we see now we're going to transition from Joshua to the judges. And so the conquest ends and the cycle begins, and Joshua gives a farewell address to the people. We see that in Joshua 23. Joshua 24 is a famous chapter. This is where he renews the covenant at Shechem, and this is where he gives the famous Joshua 24:15 passage, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And so Joshua dies. The land has been taken and divided, and the people now in each of these tribes and each of these areas are to continue what Joshua started. So the Canaanites have not been driven out. The land has just been taken from them. And so they are now to complete what Joshua started, but they don't. They do not. And because they do not, the cycle begins. So what does that mean? Well, in our next unit, we're going to look at what exactly this is. So what is the cycle? And we're also going to look at the judges. So if you would join me in our next unit for the cycle and the judges, where we see sin, subjugation, prayer, deliverance, and rest.